Spoilers for seasons 1 through 5 of the Magnus archives ahead. You've been warned. Hey y'all, I'm AftonGeek here, and I have talked about the Magnus archives a lot. I've done a monthly series for the past year where I talk about the entities. I did an hour-and-a-half long video explaining the full series in May last year, and with Protocol on the way, there's plenty more of my talking about TMA to come. But today, to celebrate the best holiday, I'm going to see what you have to say about this amazing series. Yes, if you haven't read the title yet, today we're going to be going over viewer-submitted Magnus hot takes, and then I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions on each before rating its hotness as I see it. Before we start though, I have to say thank you to everyone who participated. This video literally wouldn't have been possible without you, and it's great to see people who care enough about my silly little videos to actually respond to a call like this. Y'all are great, really, you are. Anyways, with the stage set and the platitudes out of the way, let's get to what you're really here for, the hot takes. From Elizabeth Davies, at ElizabethDavies5296. Jon wasn't stupid for shaking Jude's hand. He knew damn well that she was going to hurt him, but he also knew that if he refused to shake her hand, he would only succeed in pissing her off, which, knowing Jude, would probably result in her hurting him even worse. He had two options: shake her hand and get only his hand burned, or refuse to shake her hand, try to run, and get his skin melted off. While Jon is absolutely prone to poor decision-making, for example his baffling choice to destroy the table, he is by no means an idiot. In the case where he does make a poor choice, it's usually because he's under an immense amount of emotional stress. Again, like with the table, people often act irrationally when in distress, and considering what Jon had been through throughout the series, it's no wonder that there would be plenty of examples of this. It doesn't make him any less intelligent, it makes him a realistically written character. I started off with this one, not just because it's a literal hot take, but also because I think it's a very interesting one. We'll talk a lot more about Jonathan Sims later, cause y'all apparently have plenty of opinions on our protagonist, but I think this feeds into a bigger issue of mischaracterizing Jon as a lot more of an idiot than he actually is. The go-to example mentioned in this comment is Jon's decision to destroy the table, which, while very nearsighted, wasn't actually that stupid. Jon was being pretty damn genre-savvy, actually, because a lot of horror teaches us to destroy the bound artifact to kill the creature associated with it. What Jon doesn't realize in this moment is twofold. He failed to recognize the connection between webs and trapping, and he failed to recognize that Decker would absolutely have destroyed the Not Them if it was that simple. So it was a decision based on a decent assumption which failed because every factor wasn't accounted for, and he was, as you mentioned, under an absurd amount of emotional distress. I would absolutely agree that his decision to shake Jude Perry's hand is not an instance of stupidity. Jon had seen Jude mold her face earlier in the conversation. He knows just how hot the wax she's made of can get, and he's very aware of what would happen to him if he accepted her offer. I think you're right that he decides to shake hands with Jude because he recognizes the risk of angering a demigod of heat, but I think there's another factor not being considered here: the eye's influence. Obviously, pre-season 4, Jon isn't a full-fledged avatar, but as the Archivist, there has to be some level of eye magic involved there. You'll notice that in this scene, Jon's decision to shake Jude's hand is in exchange for information, specifically about Mike Crew. The Watcher has one consistent character trait, and that is its unending hunger for knowledge, so I think Jude has also provided the perfect incentive for Jon to take her deal. If he accepts, he avoids the potential stick of extended violence, but he also gets the carrot of more information. I think that decision was very intentional and makes it a neat bit of setup. Either way, yes, I find Jon to be very realistic and compelling, and I almost totally agree with your comment. On the heat scale, I'd rate this one a 4 out of 10. There's a lot of fandom discourse about Jon's stupid decision-making, but I think just as many people recognize the reasons Jon made those decisions beyond just Johnny wanted him to, and the plot needs to happen. From Galissapod_15, at Galissapod_15. Elias is my favorite character. I know many despise him, but I am happy every time he makes an in-person appearance. My favorite episodes are the ones where he reads statements or extracts them. I think he is really well written, and his VA is my favorite voice in the series. This was agreed with in a follow-up comment by Marigaby Teyssier, hope I got that name a little bit better this time around, at Marigaby Teyssier 2279, who said, "I also really like Elias. He's a fucked up little man, and I love that for him." Elias is my second favorite member of the Magnus staff, behind Daisy and just barely in front of Jon, so I am a bit biased here, but I tend to agree. I have a friend who has very positive thoughts on Ben Meredith's voice, but I personally have always thought that it's just alright. If nothing else though, I think it really effectively gets across the vibe of a centuries-old man pretending to know what a meme is. Also, tearing traumatic memories out of people's heads or stitching others in there, terrifying. Keep me far away from him, but this is also a horror podcast, so it means he's doing his job right. I'm only giving this one a 2 out of 10 though, because while I feel like the general trend of the discourse is to dislike Elias, I've seen too many people horny over him to think he's an unloved character. Oh, also, his final few lines in Mag 200? Gold. From Marigaby Teyssier at Marigaby Teyssier 2279. 1. They did the Extinction so wrong. It's supposed to be a main threat of Season 4, but never feels like it. It could have been cool, and I'm sad that it isn't. Number 2. The Vast is overrated. I feel like it's a lot of people's favorite entity because of the ocean and the avatars, but to me, it's not worth the hype. Number 3. Jon's not short. He's like 1.85 meters in my mind. So, starting at the top, I couldn't agree more. I have long said that the Extinction deserved so much more than it got, but I would disagree on one point. I actually think the Extinction would have worked much better as the threat of Season 5. Obviously, Season 4 is the season where it's introduced, and Martin spends most of the season at least nominally trying to stop it, but one of my main issues with Season 4 is that it already felt overstuffed, and adding in an even greater Extinction presence would probably have been too much. Moving it over to Season 5, especially in a world slowly barreling towards its own fear heat death after a literal apocalypse, would have been quite fitting. I like to imagine that if Johnny and Alex had gone with the originally planned ensemble for Season 5, the Extinction would have played a larger role, but I suppose we'll never know. Maybe I should ask Johnny on Tumblr, just for the hell of it. This hot take gets a 1 out of 10 because I think there's probably like one Magnus fan who would have been disappointed with more Extinction. While I do think the Vast is very appreciated in the community, especially compared to the often forgotten Buried, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that it's overhyped. Relative to the show? Yeah. If you got into Magnus after watching the community reaction to Mike Crew, then watched him get shot like 30 minutes after he first appeared, you'd probably be pretty confused, but I'll be honest, I was too. I've always disliked the unceremonious dispatching of Mike, since he was built up so much before his introduction, and I think that act of disrespect towards a character who people anticipated for so long might be part of the reason people gravitate towards the Vast. The other parts are just how common acrophobia, aerophobia, and thalassophobia are, and that Simon Fairchild is a joy to listen to. I'm gonna give this hot take a 6 out of 10 because I've seen a lot of community support for the Vast, and anything about the community itself is going to be controversial. Speaking of controversial opinions the community won't like, let's talk about Fen and Jon for a minute. I definitely don't think Jon's quite 1.85 meters tall, which for my fellow Americans who don't understand anything not in freedom units, that's a little over 26 Big Macs, but I also don't think he's as short as the community makes him out to be. Obviously, he's a fictional character, and if you want to say he's a 2-foot tall goblin, I can't say you're wrong, but to me he's about 1.66 meters tall, or about 5'5". I still think he's below average height, but I don't think he's that short. Although, I will say that during my original listen, I pictured him taller, and the fanon design has just poisoned my mind. The character height hill I will die on, though, is that Martin is not tall. The fandom always depicts him as this mountain of a man, and I'm just like, listen to his voice. That's a little guy. Your Honor, he's a silly little man, I rest my case. Anyways, side tangent over, I'm giving this an 8 out of 10, because people have very strong opinions about the fanon designs, but I think that Jon's height is one of the more negotiable aspects. Thanks for all the submissions. From Douglysium at Douglysium9770. The Extinction is actually implied to be very different from the End, and more broadly seems to be the fear of change in general. I ended up writing an entire article on this on Tumblr and a Google Doc, but to put it more briefly, I'm going to point to what Adelard Decker says in Mag 134, Time of Revelation. But now the fear is not of a rapture or a revelation. It is of catastrophic change. Mankind will warp the world so much that it kills us all, and leaves only 1,000 years of plastic behind. Technology will strip us of what it means to be human, leave us something alien and cold. We will press a button that in a moment will destroy everything we have ever been. Animals are witnessing the end of their entire species within a single generation. This, along with some other details, point to the idea that the Extinction is more so the fear of change, and not just death on a mass scale, even if that can be a part of it. The emphasis on change would also explain the Extinction's emphasis on things like mutations, a type of change, and technology, something that's heavily associated with progress and advancement. I bring this up as a hot take because it seems to be at least a somewhat common sentiment that the Extinction and the End should be the same thing, but they actually have a decent amount of stuff setting them apart, and we actually weirdly got a lot of hints and implications as to what the Extinction's deal is, despite not seeing it a lot. Of course, obviously, we don't have nearly as much info on it as the other entities, but there are definitely some implications as to what its deal is. Also, the slaughter is justified in being separate from the desolation. The slaughter is the fear of violence, and the desolation is the fear of loss and destruction. If the slaughter is usually getting stabbed, then the desolation is usually having your house burned down or favorite china glass collection smashed. Another take I see a lot is that the desolation and slaughter should be the same entity or something, but in my opinion that's kind of far from the truth when you actually sit down and think about what each entity represents. First off, these are really impressive articles that cover a lot of interesting ideas, so if y'all are interested in reading them, I'll have them linked below. Douglysium, if you're uncomfortable with that, just let me know, I'll get rid of it. Anyways, yeah, I totally agree that the End and Extinction are not the same thing. The Extinction is all about a world where people have either been removed or so horribly changed that they can't be recognized, but it's also about the things that inherit the Earth. It's actually a very interesting message, because it covers the idea of the fortitude of the Earth. Realistically, something will claim the Earth when we're gone, and the idea that humans aren't this apex of creation, but are just a rung on an endless evolutionary ladder is an existentially terrifying thought on a species-wide scale. Beyond that, the Extinction is undeniably symbolic of change, and I think that's clear in almost all of its iterations. I'd say this is about a 4 out of 10, since I do agree that the Extinction is pretty misunderstood, but I also think that that's mostly just a byproduct of it not appearing much. On the second one, the Desolation is not the entity I would have said for what the slaughter would combine with, we'll get into that later, but I think you make some interesting points here. I think the Desolation is a very specific fear, being the fear of violent loss, and the slaughter is just so much more than that. The slaughter isn't as much the fear of loss as it is the fear of the violence itself. I'd say the slaughter's connections to the Desolation are about as deep as its connections to the other entities. Bloodlust at all costs? That sounds just about as hunt as it is slaughter. Fighting against a faceless horde? Count in the lonely, vast, or stranger here. Being just some pawn in a greater machine fighting because it's all you can do? Sounds like the web's manipulation. The best entities are the most complex ones, but by proxy they're also the entities which are the easiest to tie to other powers because they have so many moving parts, and the slaughter certainly falls into that category. I'll give this a 3 out of 10, because I've seen a lot of discourse about the slaughter, as appears later, but I think narrowing it down to the Desolation makes it harder to apply elsewhere. Before we move on, if you thought this question was interesting, once again, consider checking out these articles, they're very well made. From Sapphic Gal at SapphiCGal3245. Not sure how hot these takes are, but the alternate universes kind of felt out of place. Almost too fantasy or sci-fi for the rest of the show. Second hot take is that Michael Crew is seriously overrated. I don't care about him. Simon Fairchild is the superior vast avatar. This was further elaborated on in a follow-up comment by Elizabeth Davies at ElizabethDavies5296, who said, "How dare you slander my short king vast avatar? Just kidding, he is a little overhyped, but I still like him for some reason." I think I agree with you about the alternate universes. It wasn't enough to negatively impact my experience of the show, but it felt a little out of left field for some reason. Starting off with the first one, I both agree and disagree. I think a reveal like that, regardless of how it was going to be done, would feel jarring, but I do think they handled it fairly well. There was Mag 114 Cracked Foundation, which made me realize just how far in advance they had that reveal planned. But there's also a few issues with having it be the only real setup of the reveal. First off, timing-wise, it's about 80 episodes before the reveal, and its events, while interesting, aren't super memorable, so there's a reason it took me until my second re-listen to realize what was going on. Beyond that, though, Hilltop Road also has some minor spiral associations, with a few distortion references and, depending on your thoughts on its events, the possession of Father Burroughs. If you ask me, a full gaslighting of your entire perceived reality sounds exactly like what would happen at the intersection between Web and Spiral, so explaining Anya Villette's encounter with existing Hilltop Road lore is easily doable. I think one more episode alluding to it in Season 4 would have really sealed the deal, so that those who were paying attention could have caught on to Annabelle's whole deal a bit earlier. I give this a 3 out of 10 on the heat scale, since I think there's still some argument to be made for the value of subtlety. As for the other point, yeah, Mike Crew gets way more fan attention than the text warrants. While I love Mike's entire statement, and his whole deal, he just isn't around for long enough to really be a memorable character. I honestly think Mike wouldn't get nearly as much love as he does if he hadn't been taken behind the shed right after his debut appearance. Also, totally agree about Simon. He is such a fun guy and I love him for that. He just likes messing with people and seems like the kind of guy who would be really fun to have lunch with if I could convince him not to throw me off a building. 7 out of 10 though, the fandom really likes Mike, so claiming he's overhyped might get a few tomatoes tossed your way. From Marcel Miranda at Marcel Miranda 1348. I am amazed by the sheer quality of your videos, dude. But on my takes, I think TMA's plot is much deeper than some of us think. There's something so mesmerizing about the idea behind the primordial fears. That's why talking about them is so amazing, because we, as human race, have only known sentiments and emotions based solely on fear. First off, thank you so much for the kind words. I do my best. Moving on to the comment, I couldn't agree more. I wouldn't be making so much content about Magnus if I didn't think there was a lot to cover here, and I still believe there are Magnus mysteries which have yet to be solved despite all of the evidence being there. The plot of TMA, though, is really deep, and from both a psychological and allegorical perspective, very interesting. Fear is such a strong emotion that we have huge regions of the brain devoted just to ensuring it works properly, and it guides many people's lives, my own admittedly included. The idea of these cosmic parasites farming humans for fear and in turn giving back some of what they receive to those who serve them is fascinating, and creates this very interesting world where the line between terror and joy becomes so blurred that even the audience can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Magnus is very good at creating a sense that there is fear in everything, and that there are powerful creatures which want nothing more than to make as much of that fear as they can, which is an existentially terrifying concept. Lovecraftian horrors are scary enough when they don't give a shit about you. They could get a whole lot scarier, though, when they actively want you to feel afraid. How do you stop fear? How do you fight fear when we can't even properly quiet it in ourselves? Fortunately, I think the Magnus community agrees, and while there aren't a ton of people actively looking into it, I don't think anyone believes that TMA is an entirely finished puzzle with all of its depths explored. Still, I might be a bit biased, given my admittedly small role in the community and the projects I'm currently working on. Oh, I almost forgot to give you an actual score for all of that, so let's just say 2 out of 10. From Dallin Hunt at Dallin Hunt 6872. The slaughter shouldn't be an entity. Everything it does is done better by one of the other entities. It adds nothing new, and slaughter stories are consistently some of the weakest in the entire series in horror and originality. This was countered by a follow-up comment by RandomJester99 at RandomJester9983, who said, "Maybe. Not great in the actual writing category, but mindless violence, wars, and that sort of stuff is a real fear that can stand with the rest from a lore perspective, so I'd have to disagree. Remember when I said we'd talk more about the slaughter? Here it is. I also think this is the first point where I really have to disagree, respectfully, of course. I think the slaughter works because it's such a conglomerate of the other fears, but I think it has a distinctive feel to it. While I admit that there's only so far you can go with the idea of senseless violence, I still think that Magnus has some interesting ideas for it. The ones that stick out the most in my mind are Grifter's Bone and that one episode with the sheep in the Scottish countryside, because they're episodes that remind you why the slaughter is so scary. The violence in the episode seemingly comes out of nowhere and affects completely random people. One minute a town is peacefully chugging along, and the next a man has a pitchfork through his abdomen. It reminds me a bit of a very intense but quite good Taiwanese film called The Sadness, in the sense that it deals with the idea that everyone carries some base violence and all it takes is the right trigger to set it off. One connection I don't see brought up very much is the slaughter's closeness to the end, since the slaughter brings great death and even has its own specter which comes to the desperate and dying, while death, the weird avatar thing that offers games, not the power, appears in an episode specifically talking about the violence of war. I really think the slaughter is unique in its ability to encompass all other fears, and to use them in new and horrific ways that do have a unique feel to them. Also, where else would we put Sick Tunes? As for the counter-argument, the idea that the slaughter should be an entity because war and bloodshed are things fear is also pretty flimsy in my opinion. The fears, as explained by Alex or Johnny in one of the billion Magnus Q&As, aren't just specific things that people are scared of. Otherwise, there'd be way more of them. Each of the fears also have to have a unique relationship with fear itself and a feeling that they carry with themselves. I do think the slaughter achieves both of those, making it a good fear, but I don't think being a thing people are afraid of is enough of a reason on its own. Obviously, it has to be an element, but there's a reason we never got a fear of the cold, or that one slice of ham that's been in the back of your fridge for a few months. Anyways, as for the idea of slaughter being removed, I give it an even 5 out of 10. I've heard a lot of discourse about the slaughter, but I think the community also really likes the list. Besides, imagine how many color wheels of fear would have to be redone. From Ryan Hosie, at RyanHosie2963. I wish we saw more of Hezekiah Wakely from Mag152. It's one of my personal favorite statements, and if I remember correctly, the only time we really hear about an avatar of the buried. This was agreed with in a follow-up comment by RandomJester99 at RandomJester9983, who said, honestly, yeah, he was really interestingly written for what he was. It's unlikely, but I have the headcanon that his long-dead corpse had a domain just burying people alive for eternity. That'd be pretty chilling, and would have made for an exceptional episode. I talked about this a bit in my most recent video about the buried. Go check it out when you're done here, it's pretty cool, and I really like how the art for that one turned out. But I love Hezekiah Wakely as a character, and I'm so disappointed we never got a recurring buried avatar. I don't know if I'd have wanted it to be Hezekiah, since living that long almost feels like it defeats the whole point of his whole eternal rest thing, but they definitely needed someone. I actually like Random Jester's idea here, because it does give him that dust-to-dust vibe, like his rotted-away corpse is still reflexively dragging others down. Maybe pre-change there was a graveyard where the caretakers kept going missing on particularly rainy nights. Or maybe his corpse is trapped somewhere deep in the coffin, his last mark on the earth. Who knows? Either way, Hezekiah does deserve more love, and the community seems to agree, so I'm only giving this a 1 out of 10. From DG Toti at DG Toti. I love TMA for the horror, but I didn't like the office drama part of it. Jon and Martin are cute together. I did feel when bad things happened to them and the other staff members, excluding Elias and Peter, but I came to the podcast for recountings of anomalous horror events, not to listen to British people fail at basic communication. Also, I get that Peter Lucas is supposed to be some master manipulator almost on par with Elias, but I didn't buy Martin being tugged into his scheme at all. In my honest opinion, it just made Martin look like an idiot because he fell for the plotting of a guy who's got more red flags than the Sahara has sand. Love that line, by the way. As for some other things, Sasha, Melanie, Georgie, and Dasira are my favorite characters, and frankly I wish they got more airtime. It feels so weird that Sasha is the only archival staff member we never got a backstory for. Everything we know about her was a present moment bit of info at the time. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've listened to Season 5, so I could be forgetting something. We have no idea what horrific past trauma might have led Sasha to joining the Institute. I wish we got like a post-mortem statement from, say, Gertrude, perhaps recounting the story of a much younger Sasha James, and how, say, her childhood best friends were slowly going missing, while over time their missing persons posters slowly became uncannier and less recognizable, and people soon began forgetting that they ever existed, and gaslighting Sasha and the non-vanished friends into questioning if they ever existed as well, until Sasha was alone with just one friend left. Maybe that friend was the one responsible for all of it. Just an idea I had. This was longer than I thought it'd be. Sorry if this is a pain for you, Afton. Just wanted to say my piece. This was added to in a follow-up comment by Ann at Annan26535, who said, "What they should have done with Martin and Peter Lucas was have Martin confess his feelings to Jon only to be turned down, and have Peter set himself up as a rebound for Martin and draw him into an explicitly homosexual relationship while deliberately playing on his daddy issues. But I guess that would have been a little too real." And then further responded to by RandomJester99 at RandomJester9983, who said, "It's not a bad idea, but Peter being a rebound or in a relationship with Martin at all sounds very strange." Whew, this one is going to be controversial to even touch. I agree with the main point that TMA is at its most interesting when it's actually being a horror series, but I believe the office drama elevates it. It creates these moments of levity that allow you to breathe between terrifying encounters, and allows for characters that can act as audience stand-ins. Jon, for at least seasons 1 and 2, which I also happen to think are the best, is just some guy trying to figure things out, and by season 2, he, much like the audience, has become fully invested in solving the mystery of everything going on. Through watching Jon, Martin, Tim especially, and everyone else slowly grow more aware of the secret darkness within their world and, by proxy, become changed by it, the audience can understand that this is actually meant to be weird. The London of TMA isn't some Night Valian horrorscape where weird occurrences are about as uncommon as the weather. It's a normal world, and the archive staff, especially in the early seasons, serve to ground all of that strangeness we hear about in the statements. That was actually part of my issue with Season 4. Is it apparent that Season 4 is my least favorite yet? I think the death of Tim Stoker really did mark a turning point for the series, because Tim was the last truly human character. Martin was in that boat too, but oops, now he works for the Lonely's head honcho. Jon has been transformed into a god of darkness, Dasira is doing fetch quests for Elias, Daisy is in monster rehab, and Melanie is growing moodier by the day thanks to the spectral bullet lodged in her leg. There is no one wholly human and innocent anymore, and while that serves the themes of the series very well, it makes the value of the office drama less effective. It's a different kind of story the framing narrative presents now, a story of the line between human and inhuman that gives us a peek into just how far the once blissful characters have fallen. I still think it serves its purpose, but the lack of tone shift means you lose out on some of the charm of the earlier seasons. This is all a big part of why I couldn't do a boneless TMA re-listen of just the office drama bits, because I think that they're meant to be supplemental. Obviously, they get more important as it goes on, but TMA was always an anthology horror series. The office bits were at their best when they made us realize just how horrifying the statements are. I have to give this one a 9 out of 10 though, because so much of the community has fallen in love with the office drama aspects of the series. I admit that it's fun, but as a horror fan, I never saw it as the main course. Still a bit disappointed that the later seasons thought serving more of the appetizer was the solution. I also totally agree that Sasha deserves so much more than she got. Sasha, as the archivist Gertrude actually wanted, is such a fascinating character, and a video I've had in the works for a long time now is doing an alternate history type thing of what might have happened if original Sasha's VA hadn't had to leave the show. Stay tuned for that, obviously, but I wish we had gotten a statement from her at some point. Maybe during Season 4, Jon finds a recording of original Sasha telling her story to Gertrude. I do really like your idea for a story, although I think it would be interesting to do something not Stranger because good God the Stranger had enough attention. Maybe go Spiral, which would explain why Gertrude trusted Sasha so much more. I don't know. Could have been, would have been, but we're past that point now. This one doesn't feel too controversial, so 2 out of 10 seems about right. Finally, I feel like I have to discuss Martin and Peter's relationship, why Martin, for all of his flaws, was a lot smarter than he seemed, and why the idea of them being romantically involved is deeply troubling. First of all, and I have to get this out of the way, Martin was playing Peter like a fiddle. Obviously, he did get drawn into the whole lonely business, but Martin's active attempts to feed Jon information about the Extinction, and then his final speech in the Panopticon before getting banished into the lonely, definitely mean he deserves more credit than he gets. Martin knew what he was doing, and while his time with Peter definitely left a mark on him, the whole point of that final speech was, at least in my mind, to show that Peter is not a master manipulator. He's someone who thinks he knows people, but really, he's just trying his best to play at being a human. He does his best with Martin, and all he gets out of it is a lost bet and an archivist-powered atom blast. As for the idea of Peter being a rebound romance for Martin after Jon is put in the hospital, no. I'm not saying it couldn't work, but just, listen to that again. Peter, the man with about as much charisma as a soggy loaf of bread, seducing Martin. You would basically have to completely rewrite Peter for that to work, and it would take the lonely element out of the ordeal entirely since it would be built on a personal connection. Holy shit. This is it, folks. This is how we could have gotten Web Martin. I kid. Martin being dumb for accepting Peter's offer? 6 out of 10. I could see people getting heated arguing this. Peter as a rebound, Martin romance? 8 out of 10. You'd have to do some real fighting for most TMA fans, although I've seen terrible things that assure me you wouldn't have to convince everyone. From TheLuckySpades at TheLuckySpades, Daisy is a monster. Even if you take the hunt out of her, she is a cop who is very fine with absolute abuses of power and outright murder, and I very much get the feeling that she would cover up quite a lot of corruption and abuse from other cops as long as she thinks they get the job done. I feel her relationship with Dasira makes people look at her character in nicer tones, but her being terrible makes the end of their arc work more, in my opinion, than if you ignore how bad she is and how low she sinks at times. This is a really interesting comment for me, because Daisy is my favorite character out of the archival staff, but I totally agree with everything said here. Daisy is a terrible person, even without the hunt. She's a person in authority who consistently abuses her position and acts violently because no one will stop her. I like Daisy Tonner not because she's a good character, she's decidedly not, but because she's a complex and compelling one. Daisy knew what she had done was terrible, but the combination of a supportive system and a god that always desired a new hunt encouraged those terrible impulses. The part that really made me like Daisy, though, wasn't her relationship with Dasira, but her attempt at redemption in Season 4, which I actually think is one of the best parts of the season. Daisy and Jon become each other's support systems because they know what the process of becoming a monster feels like, and while Jon was slowly consumed by his patron, Daisy spent Season 4 running from hers, living in the shadow of the atrocities she committed and the damnation which punished her for it in the coffin. There is a particularly powerful moment in Season 5 where Jon recognizes that Daisy never asked him for forgiveness for her cruelty towards him in the early seasons, and the Archivist believes it's because she knew she didn't deserve it. I think that one scene really succinctly summarized who Daisy Tonner became after escaping the coffin. Daisy was a monster, and she knew to the very end that she didn't deserve to be forgiven for it. I think a lot of the community knows this, so I don't think it's too spicy of a take, but it still deserves a 4 out of 10 for how much it gets into touchy subjects of morality and the like. From Ya Girl Car at Ya Girl Car 1986. Daisy did nothing wrong. Right after the last one, too. I think the argument here is that a lot of Daisy's actions were under the goading influence of the hunt, which, fair enough, but the hunt can't be blamed for all of it. Certainly not to the point where I'd say Daisy did nothing wrong. I think the scene I mentioned for the last question really shows why the idea that Daisy did nothing wrong is built on weaker foundation. If everything Daisy did was under the command of the hunt, then there would be no reason for Daisy to be so ashamed of her actions that she would believe she didn't deserve forgiveness. So much of TMA is built on trying to find the line between doing things because you want to, and doing them because you have to. And to say that the want side of things played no role in it isn't really fair. I do find it funny, though, that we got 2 hot takes answering the exact same question from opposite sides. Speaking of heat, I think this one is a lot harder to defend, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10, because, she did kill a lot of people. From MoonBunnyGW at MoonBunnyGW8342. Daisy and Basira's relationship isn't romantic. Thank you. I have always thought that the idea of Daisy and Basira being in a romantic relationship does serious damage to the purpose of their story and the themes it seeks to convey. Daisy is, as discussed above, a ruthless, bloodthirsty monster, but Basira protects her nonetheless. If they're romantically involved, this dynamic becomes so much simpler. Of course Basira is protecting Daisy. Love makes you ignore red flags for people. Why wouldn't she do her best to help her romantic partner, even if she has to kill a few people along the way? Obviously, being in a relationship doesn't immediately excuse you for murder, and your partner might still get mad and call you a dangerous psychopath who shouldn't be allowed near other people, and leave you to bury the bones by yourself, which would go way faster if you had a second pair of hands. Where was I? Oh, Daisy. It doesn't immediately excuse you, and it could have made for some very interesting drama if that was the path they wanted to take, but what they chose instead was, in my opinion, way more interesting. The idea of supporting someone, not because you're in love with them, but because it's your job, and you have to learn to trust them for your own survival, is fascinating and not explored in nearly enough media. We as a society have a tendency to make everything romantic, which becomes really unfortunate in circumstances like this where the non-romantic option is leagues more interesting. Basira and Daisy both become so much more complex if their relationship is built on obligation and slowly earned trust, rather than the emotional powerhouse of the bond of love. This one is pretty damn controversial, so I'll give it a 7 out of 10. People like their Dasira ship, what can I say? Another one from Elizabeth Davies at Elizabeth Davies 5296. Martin and Jon's relationship could have used more build-up. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore the two of them together, but I wish we could have seen more of them developing feelings for one another, particularly on Jon's end. We know by the end of Season 3 that Martin has romantic feelings for Jon, but we don't get any confirmation that Jon shares those feelings until the tail end of Season 4. Honestly, if it weren't for the sheer quantity of JMart fan art, which was originally what pulled me into the fandom, I think the end of Season 4 would have caught me very off guard. Here we get into a genre of hot takes I like to call the Why is JMart cluster. It would seem that y'all have very strong opinions about the ship between Jonathan Sims and Martin Blackwood, so let's talk about that. As someone who didn't get into the fandom because of JMart and did not see it coming, Season 4 caught me quite off guard. I think Season 4 was meant to be the build-up of Jon's end of the romance, but it really didn't work, because Jon and Martin barely interact in the entire season. Martin's care for Jon had been really apparent as far back as Seasons 1 and 2, but the fact that it was always around meant I didn't even realize it was romantic for a lot longer than I should have. Admittedly, I'm quite bad at judging between romantic attractions and normal ones anyways, but I like to think it's more than me being unobservant. JMart really does just happen, and if there were more bumps or stumbles or any sign of difficulty in Season 5, it might not have felt so jarring, but from an audience perspective, it seems like they go straight from the Season 4 finale to being in lovebird lockstep without a second glance, and it just feels off. Like we missed a very important step in the relationship, because we did. I get trauma and intense situations forcing people together in bad circumstances, but Jon and Martin's Season 5 romance is almost too perfect. I'm not asking for drama for the sake of drama, but just some sign that they have problems beyond just, why didn't you blow that guy up for me, would be nice. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 on the hot take scale because I think the community has become so entangled with its own shipping that it never really realized just how disjointed that all felt. I still wish we'd gotten a Martin full of spiders. From Oliver at Pissboy847. Jon and Martin's relationship was a bit rushed. Sure, it was the whole trauma bond thing, but in Season 4, it feels like Jon's feelings came out of nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it sort of feels like an afterthought. This was also agreed with in a follow-up comment by RandomJester99 at RandomJester9983, who said, "Agreed. Honestly, I wish they could have had at least one scene in Season 3 building up to things. They're super cute together, but if we at least had that, I feel like it would have felt much more deserved." Building off of the last one, I totally agree that JMart would have been better in the long run if it was more effectively built up in the beginning. Jon makes the gradual turn from seeing Martin as a useless fool to actually caring for him as a member of the staff, but we never really see the moment where that last turn is made from appreciation to love. For as much as I hate to say it, because the statements are the best part of TMA, I think having a few scenes between Jon and Martin in Seasons 2, 3, and 4, building the groundwork for a realistic relationship to develop, would have done wonders for their relationship dynamic in Season 5. It's one of the few spots in TMA where I feel the payoff just wasn't really earned. Like the last one, this gets a 6 out of 10 for the same reasons listed above. From Anon, at Anon26535. Jon reciprocating Martin's feelings didn't feel organic at all, and was very obviously pandering to the fangirls. This was also agreed with in a follow-up comment by Oliver at Pissboy847, who said, "Yeah, I love them, but Jon's feelings felt like they came out of nowhere." I think this is putting it a little bit harshly, but yeah, as I've said above, I agree that Jon's feelings don't feel organic. The bit I want to focus on, though, is the part the community played in the matter. Was JMart really created because of the community? I personally doubt it, since the groundwork for it was there from the beginning if you were paying close attention, but I will say that I could believe the reciprocation of Martin's feelings was a late addition. Still, even if it was pandering, I'd say it worked pretty damn well. A lot of TMA's community come from the JMart ship, and those who are here for other reasons still generally enjoy it. I'd say, if nothing else, that making JMart canon was a smart business move for Rusty Quill. This one is phrased with a bit more spice, so I'll bump it up to a 7 out of 10. Once again, adding the community to anything makes it riskier. From Your Mother, of course, at Your Mother, of course, 7474. I don't like JMart at all. I don't know what it is about it, but I just don't like it. First of all, a comment from Your Mother. I didn't know I was in the presence of a celebrity. Stupid, worn-out jokes aside, this one is a pretty spicy take. I wouldn't say that I hate JMart, because I don't. I actually quite like them. In theory. My issue with their relationship is that it, 1, feels so out of left field, which we've already covered plenty, and 2, makes Season 5 too centralized. Season 5 is almost exclusively the story of a couple who argue a little bit but are otherwise perfectly functional despite having only had 24 conversations max in the last year, taking a sightseeing tour through hell. I think if JMart had had just a few actual rough patches to show it wasn't perfect, and there had been a few more familiar ensemble faces, Season 5 might have been more positive in my mind. Either way, don't think I'd say I hate JMart entirely. I'm gonna give this one a solid 9 out of 10, because defending the argument that JMart is irredeemable is pretty tough. From YanDanTDM at YanDanTDM. I don't like Jonathan Sims. Literally the main reason I couldn't push myself through the whole podcast. He's insufferable. This was countered in a follow-up comment by RandomJester99 at RandomJester9983, who said, admittedly, he's a complete jackass in the first season. He gets a lot better over time, but I see your perspective. And this is a hot take, especially as the show goes on, but I'll be honest, I prefer Season 1 and 2 Jon. Obviously, Jon is a dynamic character, and his growth over the 5 seasons is a big part of what makes TMA so compelling, but the idea of a skeptic who knows that there's a whole world of supernatural creatures, but puts on an act to fool himself into believing he's safe is, say it with me now, very interesting and doesn't appear in enough media. If Season 1 shows just a few cracks in his skeptic mask though, Season 2 shows him scrambling to hold the last few pieces on. Nobody is quite the same after the Prentice attack, Sasha especially, but Jon seems to take his words in the tunnels to heart. Jon refuses to become another goddamn mystery, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to get to the bottom of what's going on. This is exactly what would happen if you took a stuffed shirt academic like Season 1 Jon and threw them headfirst into a world of madness and fear, which is what Season 2 effectively does. Season 3's Jon is interesting, but let's be real, Tim is the standout character of Season 3, though Jon's dedication to getting a few answers, as we discussed in the first question, are unmatched. Season 4 Jon and Season 5 Jon are all on the same gradual line of avatarhood, and while it's fascinating to watch a man have his humanity stripped away bit by bit, that loss of humanity also means the loss of the Jonathan Sims who provided a skeptical eye to the fantastical events of the early statements. Either way, Jon's pretty popular, given that he is the main character, so I feel safe calling this an 8 out of 10. From Cinder, at Cinder6775. Jürgen Leitner was so lovely. I found him so endearing in his episode, and was so sad when he died. I saved the hottest take for last. No other could be hotter, a 10 out of 10 all the way. In all seriousness, I sort of agree. Leitner is a figure of hubris, a man who thought he would protect the world by locking away its evils, only to wind up giving those evils a name. He was, in many ways, a classic tragic hero, born into wealth and society, gathering powerful artifacts as he aged, but eventually succumbing to his own hamartia of pride and believing he could control powers far greater than he was. By the time Jon finally meets Leitner, he's a miserable old man, forced to hide in tunnels from the enemies he created and the monsters he unleashed, a shell of his former self. Leitner was a man at his wit's end, and all that left for him to do was to meet a metal pipe's end. Honestly, yeah, sure, a Gertrude prequel series would be great, but I would love to see a series on a young Leitner. Show us his rise, show us his height, show us his downfall. Just like that, we've reached the end of your submitted hot takes. It was a lot of fun to talk about these, and while I was originally going to add a few of my own here at the end, they mostly wound up getting dropped throughout the other responses anyways. If you have any more hot takes, feel free to share them below, and if there are enough responses, I might just have to make a part 2. Even if I don't have another episode of this though, I do want to do more stuff with the community, since I think it's a really fun way to get everyone involved and bring our little viewer base closer together. Also, while I have you here, you should consider subscribing to see lots more Magnus content in the future. There are tons of fun videos in the works, plenty of which I'm sure you'll enjoy, so dropping a sub is an easy way to show me that you want to see more. Besides, if you hurry, you might just help us hit 1.5 thousand. I still have no idea what I'm gonna do for that. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I've been AftonGeek here, and good night, YouTube people.